After 14 years, the Reproductive Health Bill is poised to become law. Advocates have long said it will help the poor and the economy because a smaller family and population means parents and the state can provide better care, services, and opportunities to the children and citizens they do have. That's supposed to mean a healthier and better educated workforce competing for a slice of the global economic pie and lower unemployment and therefore higher incomes. Business groups say it is a direct poverty reduction strategy. But the Philippines is now thriving in large part because of a so-called demographic sweet spot, a large working-age population produced by the high birth rates some RH advocates blame for the country's poverty. Soon after the president certified the bill as urgent last week, we talked with one of the country's best-known economists on why he says high birth rates are good and RH bad for the Philippine economy. Good evening, I'm Coco Alcuaz. This is Inside Business. Dr. Villegas, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Many economists, including some from UP, from Ateneo, your own alma mater, La Salle, have endorsed the RH bill. And they say it's good economics. We're as close as we ever have been to passing an RH bill. You, of course, oppose that view. If it passes, how does the Philippines' economy change?
It will threaten what many outsiders are saying is our #1 asset, a young and growing population. In fact, they use the expression sweet spot or demographic dividend. I think it will be counterproductive, and especially now that my colleagues in the schools are saying that really their main interest is to reduce the fertility rate of the poor. They use that expression, and that the final version of the bill really addresses this question. And that's where I disagree with them. First of all, it sometimes sounds almost racist that the poor should not have too many children and that they should be encouraged to have few children. First of all, the poor are generally in the countryside. 75% of the Philippine poor are in the farms. I've been always telling them, can you imagine telling a farmer whose average age right now, incidentally, is 57, that he should not have more than 2 children? Who will take his place? Who will help him? Especially that we have completely neglected the farmers by not providing them farm-to-market roads, infrastructures. The only resource he has is human resource. And then we tell them, no, you cannot have your human resources because we advise you to have few children. So that's the first objection I have to saying let's reduce the fertility of the poor.
I think in part their argument is that if the population was smaller,
Yes.
the government would need to spend less on services for the poor and be able to devote the money to bigger infrastructure projects that could get the economy stronger.
Yes.
And that's what's supposed to fuel the economy forward.
Yes, yes. But that's my point. The government has more than enough resources if we address the real roots of why we are poor, which is wrong priorities, that we have wasted billions and billions of pesos over the years to nurture completely artificial, inward-looking, capital-intensive industries. And secondly, and this is something that the president always says, corruption takes out from the stream of the government literally billions of pesos. I mean, it was estimated by the World Bank ADB 10 years ago that every year 400 billion pesos are being wasted in corruption. So I question the statement that we don't have money for infrastructures.
The LaSalle paper, the
Yes.
professors from LaSalle, they said that the RH bill is not a cure-all to solve the problem of poverty. It's a vital component of a complex set of interventions that all sectors of society, not just the state, should undertake to promote and make successful. In other words, have an RH program,
Yes.
but have these economic programs, these intelligent economic programs you're talking about.
Yes.
They should work together.
Yes, but that's my point. And that's why I also want to emphasize, I completely agree with my colleagues that there are probably 10 to 15 solutions to poverty, starting with infrastructures, making credit available to the poor, microcredit, improving the quality of basic education, preparing more and more technical schools for people who should not go to college, and I can go on, social enterprises. So I want to emphasize this because these are the things that unite us, and today it is so important to be united in attacking the #1 problem of the Philippines, which is poverty. The thing that does not unite us is precisely this idea that by trying to reduce the fertility of the poor as one of the solutions, they are really doing something counterproductive, because they are removing a very important human capital that the country needs.
Do you talk to members of the administration?
Yes, yes.
This is the administration that talks about the demographic dividend, the demographic sweet spot.
Correct.
On the one hand,
Yes.
saying that a majority of Filipinos are now working age productive, that's why we're at that sweet spot.
Correct.
It's the same administration that's now pushing for the RH bill.
Yes.
Do you tell them that these are two irreconcilable ideas?
I've said it so many times, but sometimes there's a blind spot as regards an emotional reaction to very specific anecdotal information, like the president saying, "Oh, I was talking to someone there in Payatas, or he's going to have his or her second child." I think a lot of the arguments are based on very specific situations that cannot be generalized. For example, think of the statistics that our fertility rate right now is accepted by everyone is already 3.1 babies per fertile woman. Now that means,
meaning in the life of a fertile
Yes.
woman, she's going to
So
have on
3.1.
average 3.1.
yeah. Now that is mostly a figure that applies to the vast majority of Filipinos who are poor, because if you say that, oh, but the rich, they only have 1.1, but they're only 1 percentage point, therefore they do not contribute to that average to the poor, which means that the majority of the poor really already have an average of 3 children. So when they start presenting all of this, emotional argument about someone in Payatas having had 12 children, and that they're using emotion rather than reason, that the average fertility, even of the poor, is already 3. And it used to be 6 in 1975. So there is already a trend that fertility rates are being reduced. Now, if we, to the RH bill, as Thailand did, as Singapore did, as some of these more aggressive countries did, push the idea of spreading contraceptives, we are going to, sooner than later, arrive at a situation where we will no longer have the demographic dividend.
There's at least one UP economist who says that if that were to happen,
Yes.
Reaching some kind of demographic death, I think you call it
Yes.
demographic suicide,
Yes.
or demographic winter,
Yes.
there's enough momentum so that's at least 70 years away.
No. Take a look at Thailand. Thailand is no longer attracting investors. In fact, if you've heard the Goldman Sachs BRIC plus the next 11, Thailand doesn't appear anymore in the list of emerging markets. And the reason is, in one generation, they shifted from a country that was still growing to a country that is aging too fast for a poor country. Thailand is a very poor country. It's $4,000–5,000 per capita compared to Singapore of 40,000. But it already has a demographic profile that's almost exactly like Singapore.
You say that China and Thailand are the two important countries that have gotten aged before they've gotten rich.
Exactly,
Right?
exactly.
But you've also called Thailand a kind of a twin of the Philippines. There's so many similarities.
Before, yes, yes.
And you're talking about statistics there. Let's just look at some statistics. Fertility rate in Thailand, 1.6. Philippines, 3.3, 3.1.
Yes.
Many economists will say that's the reason why their per capita income is $4,000. Ours is half of that. And poverty incidence there is 8%.
Yes.
Ours is in the 20s.
I read it completely differently. It was not their population policy. It was their tremendously enlightened focus on farm-to-market roads, irrigation systems, and all what the farmers needed that started in the 70s while we were still so obsessed with the wrong kind of industrialization. Thailand was already developing its rural areas in its agricultural sector. That is what explains the difference.
How do you prove that it wasn't the reproductive program, but it was mostly the economic program that resulted in that kind of an economy?
Well, by showing the vast difference between our agricultural sector in terms of its contribution to income, to exports, to employment, and you can see that there's a very big contrast with the way Thailand developed its agriculture quantitatively in terms of income, employment, and so on and so forth, and our own performance. So you can show from statistics that the major influence in the Thailand success, at least compared to the Philippines, as I said, Thailand is still poor. I cannot compare Thailand, for example, South Korea, is that they had the right economic policy, and that if they did not implement a very aggressive population control program, they would still right now be enjoying the so-called sweet spot or demographic dividend. And they would not be scratched off from the list of emerging markets.
You talk about, you mentioned a while ago the kinds of economic policies that we should be pursuing. Countryside infrastructure, quality basic education, health services, microcredit. In some of your papers, you've also mentioned pursuing or promoting the CCT program.
Correct, correct.
Now, one of your interesting ideas about the CCT program is you've said that instead of giving away contraceptives for free, make the poor use the CCT money to buy their own contraceptives.
Yes, well, that's exactly what I propose to solve the moral problem of consciences of Catholics who know that their taxpayers are being used by the government to pay for condoms and pills. And that is a real objection based on conscience. In order to solve that moral problem, and if the government really thinks erroneously that the poor should have condoms and pills to reduce their fertility, I think it's erroneous, because I don't believe in statistics, for example, unwanted pregnancies. International data show that even in poor countries, generally women have the number of children that they desire. This thing of unwanted pregnancy is a concoction.
Of course, we're two men here and we don't know.
That's right, that's right. But I'm referring to a Harvard study, Lan Pritchett, who showed it, that women ordinarily have the number of children that they have. But let's put that aside. But if the government really believes erroneously that reducing the fertility of the poor is important and that they should have access to contraceptives for free, to solve the moral problem of Catholic taxpayers not wanting to pay for government purchase, let them include in the cash transfer to every household a budget for condoms and artificial contraceptives.
In essence, you're saying, here's your CCT.
Exactly.
If you want to use part of it.
Exactly.
But that poses to the family, to the poor family, a choice.
Precisely.
Are we going to feed and help educate our children, or buy more contraceptives?
And I just got involved in research, very, very objective research, which asked mothers in an urban area, the poor mothers, what are you spending your money on? And if the government were to help you, what would you want the government to spend? And there was a very long list, and there was no mention of artificial contraceptives, which means that, you know, the best way to find out what poor people want to spend on is to observe their actual purchasing decisions. Not this thing of, asking them with survey question, which sometimes can be loaded, with all sorts of subliminal messages. And I'm sure that if the government transfers through the conditional cash transfer money, telling the poor woman, okay, this is money for condoms and pills, I'm almost sure that a lot of that money would not be spent on condoms.
One last statistic before we go to a break. There's a family income and expenditure survey
Yes.
that shows that the fewer children a family has, the less likely it is to be poor. A family with one child, poverty incidence there is 2.9%.
Yes.
A family with 5 children, it's 20%.
Yes.
8 children, 42%.
Yes. But that again was addressed by one of our professors, Dr. Roberto de Vera, who studied that phenomenon and was able to show that the determining factor was the lack of education of that poor woman with 8 children. That it was education and it was not the other way around. That a household was poor not because it has too many children, that house was poor because the woman had practically no education.
This is a very chicken and egg of argument.
Of course.
We'll get back to that in a moment. More inside business when we come back.
Lahat tayo may kanya-kanyang kwento. May kwento ng pagkakawalay. May kwento ng hangaring malayo ang marating. For 65 years, Film Life has been empowering the lives of Filipinos.
Sa buhay, basta't may plano, kaya mo yan. Basta't may plano, kaya mo yan.
Welcome back to Inside Business. Dr. Villegas, you've said that by helping the poor retain their pro-children outlook, we prolong this demographic dividend.
Correct.
Isn't that a big burden for this country, which is supposedly getting richer, to put on the poor?
No, they are the ones who still have a very manifest preference for children. And as you can only imagine happening, as people start becoming middle class, and not to mention rich, they develop the Western contraceptive mentality. And that's very obvious already, as you all pointed out. Now, who are the ones who are still willing to have children? Who are the ones who do not equate pregnancy with a disease, as you find among women in Singapore and other places? It's the women in the poor households.
But whether you call it anecdotal or some people call it statistical, they will say that a lot of poor women don't want to have as many children as they do have.
Well, that remains to be seen. So that's why we have to test that now. But
so why not give them the choice?
No, that's exactly. One way is, as I said, through that cash transfer. I would be willing to have that. But I still maintain that the typical woman from the lower income class, C, D, and E, still has considered the Filipino preference for children. And so what we have to do is let society help them precisely to all sorts of means of providing for their children, because that is society investing in human capital.
You've said that, I don't know if we're going off on a tangent here, that as people or Filipinos get richer, they tend to have fewer children.
Correct.
So as the economy progresses and more of these more of the poor people have fewer children, we're headed that direction anyway.
But that's exactly the point. For us to prolong the demographic dividend so that it doesn't stop abruptly, let us invest in the children that these poor households are still having, and they're the ones who are going to be the people who can still man the BPO and so on and so forth, because you can expect those to come from the richer household. Just to remind you, both in the agricultural sector and in the labor-intensive BPO sector, we need to have, at least for the next 20 to 25 years, workers. And if suddenly, because we convince the poor women that they also should have only 1 or 2 children, that's the end of our demographic dividend.
Let's end this RH discussion where
Yes.
more or less where we began. There are those who say that because of the high population, we have very strong growth. But the downside of that is that you have an increasing number of uneducated or lesser educated and less healthy workforce. Isn't it a matter of finite economics in the sense that the government needs to spend either for education, but if it does that, it won't be able to spend, but if it's spending for the poor, it can't spend so much for the education part?
That's what I completely deny. As I said, there is enough money to go around for both educating the people and at the same time building the infrastructure.
How do you prove that to the president, that there's enough money to go around?
Well, he's the one who has been saying that kung walang mahirap, kung walang korap, walang mahirap. And he should take a look at all the figures that have been specified as the amount of corruption going on. That's 400 billion pesos, and that's more than our yearly deficit. And so which means that if we could really address that, and I'm very glad that you have a very strict BIR now, and you have more and more very honest people running the departments that used to be very corrupt, like the Department of Public Works, even the Department of Education. I think the problem of money is secondary. And in fact, if you take a look at our financial system, it is oozing with money out of its ears. So to say that money is the problem is people.
I guess part of the problem is that it takes a while for the economy to grow, to expand to the kind of size that we all wanted to achieve.
Yes.
In the meantime, another family, another woman is going to have their 6th or 7th child, and that could trap them into the kind of poverty that we want them to escape from.
But that's what I said.
So why not give them the choice now, so at least they have the chance to get out of it while the economy gets where we want it to go?
Yes, well, in this exceptional situation when there really are 7 or 8, then let them have this cash transfer and help them to reduce the number of children. But if there is a mother who's poor and does not really want to reduce the number of children, I think society should consider those children as the #1 asset and should actually help that family with all types of social policies, not only at cash transfer, but helping the children get scholarships, helping some of the older children to start businesses and so on and so forth. I think we have to look for positive solutions to make people productive rather than stopping people from existing.
Now, this wouldn't be a problem if an economic rising tide lifts all boats and the economy grows, as you have said, 8% next year, and maybe that kind of rate going forward.
Yes.
You are projecting a pretty high rate compared to other projections.
Yes.
Amid everything that's going on in the world.
Yes.
Why do you think we'll grow 8% next year?
Well, next year, all the engines of growth that made 7.1% possible in the third quarter will actually be stronger. You will have a lot of the projects that have been postponed because of all types of fears about corruption, all sorts of analyses. They're going full steam. Then the remittances from overseas workers continue to grow.
We don't know that they're going full steam yet.
They are. they are. In fact, you have, first of all, the Department of Public Works already using more than 80 to 90% of what they were supposed to use.
So not necessarily the public-private partnership program.
No, first of all, Department of Public Works. And you have more and more of these PPPs, you know, precisely because there is so much money in the system. You have the Ramon Angs, the Manny Pangilinans, the Henry C's, really wanting to be able to get into these projects. And I'm sure in 2013 we will see a lot of them. Well, and of course, an added engine of growth is going to be the money for elections. So, I mean, if you take a look at the last 4 elections, it was very clearly shown that elections usually contribute anywhere from 1 to 2 percentage points more to the GDP.
One of the signs of the growth is the property market.
Exactly.
You've
yes.
said that if there's going to be a bust or even just a slowdown,
yes.
it's going to be in the high-end
Correct.
Part of it.
Correct.
Why is that?
Well, because the types of units being, for example, marketed by DMCI, Fimla Properties, Alveo, all of these for middle-income families, you have a huge market from OFWs and now from the 600,000 BPO workers who are practically either still single or very young families, and they are the ones who can amortize the units from 3 to 5 million. So there's no problem because they're the ones who are actually using the units they're buying.
Which is not the case.
It's the case with those that are 15 million or up.
So why shouldn't we be scared about a property bust?
Well, first, I mean, there could be a correction at that level, not at the lower level, which is right now the majority of units that are being put up. But those units in Port Bonifacio, you know, Rockwell, there will be a correction. I'm sure of that. There will be an oversupply.
You're talking about within 3 years or so.
Within 3 years.
Yeah.
But there will not be a bubble, strictly so-called, because the ones who are buying are not buying on credit. It's their money that they're using. So they can afford to wait. So they will find their units vacant, but they're not going to panic and start selling their units. So because if you take a look at who are buying these units, it's the same names. And so it's not like what happened in Spain and the US,